morning, everyone, and thanks very much, Tom, for the introduction. So it's really a pleasure to be here this morning to discuss the crucial topic of healthcare governance. And as Tom has already said, my name is Catherine Allen, and I've spent much of my career being involved in the complex landscape of investigations with a particular focus on healthcare and the structures and processes and policies that govern investigations in those particular areas. So as we delve into the intricacies of governance this morning, I hope to share some insights from my experience and so that we can have a dialogue on how we can collectively strengthen the foundations of our healthcare institutions. So good governance isn't just a buzzword, it's the foundation for a system that prioritises patient safety and builds public trust. This collaborative effort requires transparent decision-making, clear accountability structures, and an unwavering commitment to ethical practices. So as healthcare professionals, you are all the linchpins of this system, and if you apply evidence-based practices and ensure responsible resource allocation, you directly enhance the quality of care, you mitigate risks, and you ultimately improve patient outcomes. So your dedication to accountability and transparency is vital. And when patients and the public see their best interests prioritised, it builds that reservoir of trust in the healthcare system. And one of the most important tools in building this trust is your commitment to thorough and impartial investigations. So investigations are often seen as punitive measures, but in fact they are critical safeguards in the healthcare system. And they are the early warning system that allows us to identify and deal with potential issues before they escalate further. And by gathering evidence in the right way, these inquiries ensure that decisions are grounded in facts, not assumptions. So this transparency, as I've already said, builds public trust and demonstrates your commitment to accountability. Thorough investigations delve deep to uncover the root causes of problems. And this then allows for targeted, effective improvements that directly enhance patient safety. In essence, your dedication to impartial investigations is the cornerstone of good governance. It ensures a healthcare system that is both transparent and focused on the well-being of those that it serves. So we all strive for excellence, but healthcare is a particularly complex field, and issues can arise in different scenarios. Of course, the obvious ones are complaints of patient safety breaches, medication errors, falls, healthcare-associated infections. But you can also have issues that arise in relation to financial mismanagement, non-compliance with regulations more generally, public health emergencies, as we've all experienced, and then other types of systemic failures. So when conducted effectively, investigations can become a catalyst for a culture of safety and accountability, and they empower you with the knowledge that the healthcare system is proactive in its pursuit of patient safety and public trust. So to equip you with some tools for effective healthcare investigations, we've compiled a flyer, it's on your seats, with our top 10 considerations for effective healthcare investigations. And I'd just like to take the next few minutes to delve through in a little more detail some of the considerations that we've highlighted in that particular flyer. So the first place I like to start is in terms of practical considerations. So the first thing that generally arises, are you dealing with an external or an internal investigation? By an external investigation, I mean an investigation by the likes of any of the healthcare regulators such as HICWA or HIPRA or indeed the HSE. And by internal investigations, I mean investigations that you commission yourselves. And if it's an investigation that you're commissioning or organising yourselves, you have then a further consideration to undertake, which is this going to be a completely internal investigation, by which I mean you use your staff members to carry out the investigation, or is it going to be an external investigation in the sense that you appoint or engage somebody to carry out that investigation for you? Some pointers as to why you might choose one or the other. Fully internal investigations are often more suitable for less complex issues. Of course, it's easier to maintain confidentiality and deal with data protection issues if you're dealing with a fully internal investigation, and it really helps to build internal learning. The benefit of using an external investigator is that it clearly offers impartiality. You may be able to call upon specialised expertise that may not be available internally, and you may also feel that you need to use an external investigator for a very serious matter or a matter that's been in the public domain or is the subject of media focus, just to demonstrate that impartiality. Choosing your investigator is also an important first decision. If you're working fully internally, obviously you'll be dealing with experienced staff with knowledge of the organisation, but then you have to be very conscious of the potential for bias if using an internal investigator. Benefit of external investigators is that they hopefully will be unbiased, they'll bring those specialised skills, but there's generally a cost attached to using an external investigator. One of the biggest issues I see at the outset of investigations and where they go wrong is a failure at the outset to clearly define the scope and the terms of reference for the investigation, and so that you get back a report at the end of the process that actually meets the issues that you want to have addressed, and also keeps the investigators very carefully within what they're required to do and not go off into different areas which is not of relevance to the issue you were concerned about. It also defines the timeline, which can be very important in healthcare investigations. We also suggest that you assemble your core team with your relevant skills, be that clinical, legal, or HR. That can be very important if you're dealing with what I'm calling fully external investigations, where you're liaising with an external regulator to know who the contact points are for the external regulator's investigation. So my next slide I've called administrative law, which sounds very intimidating, but it's really, administrative law is really all about fair procedures, which are so important in any type of investigation. So that's why my first column there is just to emphasize the importance of fairness investigations, to ensure that your policies and your procedures must always ensure that all parties are treated impartially, given a chance to respond, and of course protected from retaliation, and that's particularly important, of course, in the context of protected disclosures. Be careful that you're always adhering to whatever internal policies you've set for yourselves regarding internal investigations, but also be aware if there are external policies which might apply, and there's very many HSE policies, for example, that apply in the context of different types of investigations and audits. Bear in mind as well anything related to disciplinary actions and confidentiality. I've put a column there, voluntary against mandatory, particularly important for external investigations. You might wonder what I mean by that. But when I'm talking about fully external investigations, so this is an investigation that is being run by an external organisation, a regulator, for example. Ask yourself, is this something I must comply with, or is it something I've been invited to comply with? And very much the tendency of organisations, if they've been invited to comply with something, is to say, oh, I really want to be helpful, I really want to try and assist whatever this investigation is about. But just bear in mind that the fact that it's a voluntary investigation will have impacts, particularly in relation to medical confidentiality and data protection issues, which I'm going to talk about in a few moments. So that's why I've just emphasised it on that slide. And just as a general point, fostering staff cooperation is just such an important part of having effective investigations generally. So, very briefly on employment law, everything I'm saying on this slide I think will be pretty obvious to everyone in the room, but ensure that your investigations comply with any applicable code of conduct for staff behaviour and disciplinary proceedings, follow correct procedures in terms of employee interviews, suspensions and potential disciplinary action, and respect employee rights to representation, confidentiality and fair process. In relation to regulatory considerations. The first point I've put up there is to remind everyone that you may have notification requirements in certain circumstances where you believe particular issues have arisen. So HICWA is the obvious one, but one that you might not think of so readily is the charities regulator. So very many of our healthcare organisations in this state are not-for-profit organisations, and they are regulated by the charities regulator. So you may actually have a duty to notify the charities regulator in certain circumstances when particular issues arise. You may also have a duty to notify HIPRA, for example. Even if you're not obliged to notify, you may feel it is beneficial to inform the regulator of a particular issue, and they may require or may be pleased to receive regular updates on your investigation process, as it may give them reassurance as to the steps you're carrying out. If you are dealing with an external investigation, just think about what the disclosure of that investigation and the ultimate report arising from it, what impact that may have, particularly on public-facing individuals in your organisation and so on. So just to think ahead in relation to those issues. Document management is a topic which I get frequently asked about. We all spent a lot of time when GDPR came in developing very careful document management policies, and a lot of that will be destruction policies as well. Just be careful that if you need to suspend your destruction policy during an investigation, that you tell the right people to do that. Legal privilege is something we get asked about a lot. It doesn't apply sometimes as widely as people think and hope, so make sure you understand if it does or doesn't apply to the particular situation you're dealing with. And do be aware that regulators have a lot of powers to compel production of documentation. So even if you think you're carrying out a completely internal investigation, subsequently that information, those documents, may become available for a public external investigation. Litigation risks, just one to think about when you're carrying out your internal investigation. A lot of documents which people might think are completely internal and are never going to be available publicly, perhaps may come out in due course through FOI requests, data subject access requests, or these regulatory proceedings that I've mentioned earlier. And just be careful about what's written down in relation to individuals, that it's accurate, true and accurate, and you're happy to stand over it, so that you minimise the risk of defamation. Notify your insurer if the investigation could give rise to legal claims, and if you have any ongoing civil litigation, just think about any impact that your investigation will have on that litigation. Data protection is a big one, and we could probably spend quite a bit of time this morning talking about this. It's one of the favourite topics for people to ask questions about. Just bear in mind, if you're using an external investigator, you will need to think carefully about how you're able to share confidential and personal data with them, so have the right agreements in place to enable you to do that. Think about your lawful basis for processing personal data. So I mentioned voluntary investigations earlier. One of the big issues with voluntary investigations is identifying your lawful basis for processing personal data. It's much easier if you have a mandatory or a mandated investigation. And then just be aware, of course, that the amount of data subject access requests that are generated now in any sort of contentious situation is huge. So just be prepared for those coming down the line and be aware that they will arise. Very briefly, one of the additional complexities, I think, with healthcare investigations that doesn't arise in other types of investigations is the medical duty of confidentiality. And that has to be borne in mind in addition to data privacy considerations. It's a careful balancing act, obviously, to weigh up the duty of the medical duty of confidentiality with the need for transparency and fair procedures. So you just need to think about all of those very carefully when you're constructing your investigation. Finally, just to mention, in relation to disclosure and access, just be prepared for, particularly with a public investigation, how you're going to deal with any queries about the investigation. If you're an FOI body, how are you going to manage FOI requests? And think about who is going to receive the final report. Is it just management? Is it regulators? Is the public more generally? And just to leave you on a final note, just be conscious of where criminal allegations might arise in relation to any investigation that you're doing. You may actually have a duty to report certain types of criminal behaviour, and then in other circumstances you may not have a duty to report, but you might feel it is appropriate to report to the police, that's an Garda Síochána, in relation to issues you've uncovered. If you do have a criminal investigation ongoing, that will impact on your internal investigation, so you just need to be aware of that. and just consider how you're going to cooperate with the authorities if one of those investigations are ongoing. So that's my whistle-stop tour of healthcare investigations. I think the link between good governance and effective investigations is undeniable, and it's very interesting to see how healthcare investigations are evolving over time. Can I just say that your dedication to good investigations will ensure a healthcare system that's not only safe and trustworthy, but also continually improving for the benefit of all. Thank you very much.